Snow slammed against the lonely Montana diner as if the night wanted to swallow her whole. Lydia stood at the entrance, thin shawl shaking around her, lips trembling, eyes begging for warmth she no longer remembered. "Just one bowl of soup," she whispered. The cashier didn't even blink. "No money? Get out." She froze, not knowing where to go, until a slow, steady voice rose behind her, so warm it felt like a miracle in the cold. "Ride with me. You won't go hungry again." Her name was Lydia, though she barely remembered the last time someone said it kindly. The hunger inside her wasn't the usual kind. It was the kind that steals dignity first, hope second, and the will to keep walking last. When she turned, the cowboy behind her stood tall despite the snow weighing on his coat. His eyes were tired, worn by years of storms both outside and inside. "I don't know you," she whispered. He nodded gently. "But I know what it feels like when the world stops caring." The diner crowd snickered, their mocking grins reflecting a comfort Lydia had never tasted. "Jake," one man scoffed, "you can't save every stray." Jake didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. One cold stare from him wiped the smirks off their faces. Lydia lowered her head. "I don't want to be a burden." Jake stepped forward, brushing snow from his hat. "A burden? No. People like you, you're the grit that keeps this land human. The world forgets that too easily." Outside, the blizzard roared harder, clawing at the windows like a wild animal hungry for its next victim. Jake walked halfway to his truck, then paused. Snow gathered on his shoulders, melting slowly into his coat. "Last chance," he called softly. "Come with me. If you stay here, the night won't forgive you." Lydia looked at the warm diner lights, cold hearts inside, then at the stranger who offered safety without asking anything in return. Something inside her cracked open as she followed him. The truck's heater breathed life back into her frozen chest. The moment she sat down, Jake reached into a worn leather bag and pulled out a clean cloth. "Hands," he said simply. She hesitated, then placed her numb fingers into his rough, warm palms. "When did you last eat?" She swallowed. 2 days. Without a word, he unwrapped a sandwich and held it out. "Eat. You don't need to explain anything yet." For the first time in days, her body remembered what comfort felt like. She took a bite, and tears burst from her eyes before she could stop them. Not because of hunger, but because kindness always hurts more when you've forgotten it exists. For 2 days she had knocked on doors until her knuckles bruised, and every door slammed the same way. Jake watched her quietly. "Where were you headed?" Lydia wiped her cheek. "Anywhere that hurts less." Jake exhaled deeply. He understood that too well. Running isn't about moving. It's about escaping what follows you. The truck cut through the snow like a tired old soldier. "My ranch isn't far," Jake said. "There's heat, food, a safe place to sleep." Lydia folded into herself, wondering if trusting him was foolish. But his voice carried a loneliness she recognized, a weight she carried in her own bones. Loneliness had a scent, a shape, a silence, and his silence matched hers. She slowly nodded. For the first time in months, she wasn't walking toward danger. She was riding away from it. At the ranch gate, Jake stepped out into the storm and opened the passenger door for her. "You can stay the night, just the night. No promises needed." Lydia nodded gratefully. Inside, warmth washed over her instantly. The crackling fire, the wooden walls glowing amber, the quiet peace that belonged only to places untouched by cruelty. When she removed her coat, Jake noticed her thin arms, the way exhaustion clung to her shoulders. Not weakness, survival. Jake moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone used to cooking for himself. He set a steaming bowl of stew in front of her. "This isn't charity," he said, in a low, firm voice. "I just couldn't leave you out there." Lydia looked up slowly. "Why?" Jake paused with the spoon still in his hand. Memories flickered in his eyes, hard ones. "Because once, someone left me in the cold. I don't want to be that kind of man again." They sat by the fireplace, watching the flames dance like quiet guardians of the night. Lydia felt a rare softness settling inside her chest. Jake noticed scars on her arms, small, hidden, but too precise to be accidents. He didn't ask. He knew the look of someone who had survived things they wished the world never learned about. Lydia waited for the questions that always came. They didn't. Instead, Jake simply said, "You're safe here tonight." And for once she believed it. The ranch was wrapped in silence, broken only by the wind hissing outside. Lydia stared into the fire, unsure of what tomorrow meant. Jake leaned back in his chair, wishing she would stay longer than sunrise. Neither spoke it aloud. Their unspoken fears floated between them. She feared being a burden. He feared watching someone walk away again. Sometimes silence holds more truth than words. Not because people can't speak, but because they're afraid of being wrong. In the guest room, Lydia ran her fingers over the quilt. Soft, clean, made with care. She slipped under the blanket, staring through the frosted window at the swirling snow. The world outside was cold, merciless, indifferent. But inside this room, she felt something she barely recognized: safety. "If he hadn't found me," she whispered, voice cracking, "I would have disappeared into that storm." Tears slid silently onto the pillow, mixing with gratitude and fear she couldn't untangle. In the other room, Jake stacked firewood, his breath slow and heavy. He couldn't explain why the thought of her leaving tightened something inside him. "Strange girl," he muttered softly. "Broken, but strong in ways people don't see." He couldn't shake the feeling that fate had placed her in his truck. For a reason. Yet he didn't imagine that sunrise would bring a twist powerful enough to change both their lives forever. Dawn spread across the ranch like a pale silver blanket. Jake brewed coffee, walked toward the guest room, and tapped the door. No answer. He pushed it open. The bed was neatly made, cold, empty. The window curtain fluttered from a draft, proof she'd left hours earlier. His heart sank as he stepped outside. Until he spotted it, a trail of footprints carved deep into the snow leading away from the ranch. But they didn't lead into the woods. They led toward the road, where someone else's footprints joined hers. Jake followed the footprints, snow crunching under his boots, breath forming ghosts in the cold air. Lydia's prints were light and hurried, as if she'd left before convincing herself it was right. But the second set, larger, heavier, sent a jolt down his spine. Someone had found her, or worse, someone had been searching. He tightened his coat and quickened his steps, each footprint echoing a fear he didn't want to name yet. The trail led to the old fence line near the road, where the storm had softened and the wind carried voices. Jake crouched behind the fence, spotting Lydia standing stiff, her arms wrapped around herself. Across from her stood a tall man in a dark coat, his posture rigid, his voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. "You think you can run from me forever?" he barked. Lydia didn't cry, she didn't plead, she just stood still, like someone used to swallowing pain. Jake felt heat rise inside him, a slow-burning anger he hadn't felt in years. He stepped over the fence deliberately, letting the crunch of snow announce him. Lydia's eyes widened, not with fear, but with something that looked heartbreakingly like shame. "I didn't want trouble," she whispered. Jake stopped beside her. "Trouble found you. That's different." The man turned, outrage twisting his face. "Who the hell are you?" Jake's jaw tightened. "The man who won't." Watch her freeze again. The stranger laughed bitterly. "She didn't tell you, did she? She's my wife." Lydia flinched, but only slightly. Jake felt the shift in her breath. "Ex-wife," she corrected quietly. "Legally, morally, every way that matters." The man stepped closer. "You ran with my money." Lydia looked at her shoes. "Money? That was my salary. You locked it from me." He grabbed her wrist. Jake's heart snapped. "Let go," he warned, voice dropping low enough to silence the wind. The man didn't. Jake didn't raise a fist, didn't need to. He stepped between them with the calm of a man who had lost too much already. "You touch her again, you'll deal with me." The man scoffed but slowly released her wrist. Jake noticed the faint red mark forming on her skin. Old habit, new wound. Lydia whispered, "Please, don't fight." Jake shook his head. "You don't have to go with him." Her ex glared. "She has no choice. She's broke." Jake turned to Lydia. "Not anymore." Her ex lunged toward her again, but Jake grabbed his arm with the force of someone who spent decades taming wild horses. The man stumbled backward, shocked. "Last warning," Jake said, voice steady as stone. "Walk away." Something in his tone, something old and dangerous, finally got through. The man spat on the snow and stormed off toward his truck. Lydia's legs buckled, but Jake caught her before she fell. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "I didn't want you to get dragged into this." Jake kept an arm around her until her breathing slowed. "Let's go back," he murmured. Lydia hesitated, staring after the man disappearing down the road. "He'll be back," she whispered. Jake inhaled deeply. "Then he'll find me waiting." She shook her head. "I can't ruin your peace." Jake looked at her carefully. "Peace isn't something you ruin, it's something you share." A single tear slid down her cheek, this one not from fear but from a piece of hope slowly returning back. Back at the ranch, Lydia sat by the fireplace again. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of finally being seen. Jake placed a warm cup of tea beside her. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said softly. Lydia swallowed. "I stayed with him too long. I thought if I tried harder he'd change. Instead, I did." Jake sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "Trying harder doesn't fix people who don't want to be fixed." Lydia took a deep breath, letting the fire warm places inside her she'd kept frozen for years. "I left with nothing, not even my clothes, just ran in the night." Jake nodded slowly. "Some things are worth running from." For the first time, a faint smile tugged at her lips. "I never thought I'd end up at a stranger's ranch." Jake chuckled. "Life doesn't care what we expect. It gives us what we fight for." Lydia looked at him, really looked, and her eyes softened. Evening arrived with orange skies painting the ranch in gentle warmth. Lydia helped Jake feed the horses, though her hands were still shaky. "I'm not used to kindness," she admitted. Jake handed her a blanket. "Kindness isn't weakness, Lydia, and accepting it doesn't make you small." She leaned against the stable door, breathing in the scent of hay, wood, and quiet. "I feel safe here." Jake smiled faintly. "Good. That's what home is supposed to feel like." When night fell, Jake cooked dinner, and Lydia insisted on helping. Their movements collided, her shy glances, his gentle instructions, building a rhythm neither had expected. "You know," Jake said softly, "you don't have to leave tomorrow." Lydia froze mid-stir. "I don't want to be a burden." Jake shook his head. "You're not. You walked into my life when it was too quiet, too empty. Maybe we both needed a reason to keep going." Later, as they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, snowflakes drifted like fragile wishes around them. Lydia looked at Jake's side profile, the worn lines, the quiet strength. "Why did you help me?" she asked again. Jake exhaled slowly. "Because no one helped me. When I needed it most, I swore if I ever saw someone in that kind of cold, I'd pull them out." Lydia's eyes glistened. "You didn't just pull me out, you brought me back." Silence settled between them, warm and full, not empty. Lydia rested her head lightly on his shoulder. Jake didn't move away. Instead, he shifted so she'd be more comfortable. "If you stay," he murmured, "it won't be out of fear. It'll be because you want to." Lydia closed her eyes. "I think I do want to." The ranch felt different now, more alive, more whole. Two broken souls weren't breaking each other, they were slowly stitching each other back together. As the night deepened, Jake draped his coat around her and whispered, "You won't go hungry again, not for food, not for safety, not for kindness." Lydia looked up at him, eyes brimming with gratitude and something gentler, something like hope looming again. "Then I'll stay," she whispered, "if you'll have me." Jake smiled for the first time in years. "I already do." And there, under drifting snow and quiet stars, two lives, once frozen, finally began to thaw together.